Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Ken. I'm Ken Biberaj, a managing director at Savills, a leading tenant advisory commercial real estate firm. We are in week 59 of social distancing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the news today, President Biden committed to waiving vaccine patents to speed distribution. Peloton announced it was recalling all treadmills after a child passed away. And today's topic is the future of retail. And we're joined by Matthew Shay, the president and CEO of the National Retail Federation. Matthew, great to see you.
Hey, Ken, good morning.
Well, I look forward to coming to one of your retail members' coffee shops and doing this in person. But until then, it's great to see you virtually.
Well, good to see you too. And Starbucks and Dunkin' have been open throughout, so and they're both great members. So you can go to Starbucks and Dunkin' anytime and get coffee, hot chocolate, donuts. One of those egg. You know what I'm talking about? With
I
bacon.
do, those little egg frittata things.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. Well, look, I think you're in a pretty unique position, right? You represent a whole swath of retailers, small to large, and you run an association that kind of looks to advocate and support them at a time where this year was, most acutely challenging, I think, for retail. How has the last year been for you personally and your team? And then we'll dive into your members, but just like at a macro level, as a leader of an organization, what's this last year been like for you guys?
Well, Ken, first of all, I think, we all feel very fortunate to be where we are now and to have made it through some really challenging times. And there are obviously, millions of Americans and others around the world who've had horrible experiences and lost loved ones and lost jobs. And so, the sun is shining today and we're making great progress in this country. But, we can't forget the hardship that so many faced. And how hard so many, particularly in the retail industry, worked to support local communities, to keep those businesses open, to make sure we all had groceries and we all had prescription drugs, and we could all go to the wholesale clubs and get the things we needed, or we could order things online. And so the workers in those distribution centers, those frontline retail workers, and the creativity, the ingenuity, the resourcefulness, both of those individuals and of the companies with and for whom they work, I think in a lot of ways served as kind of economic first responders to help us get to this point. And so, we took a lot of cues from our leaders and from the executives at those companies and how they were working with their teams. And, everyone has said, well, we had to pivot and we had to go digital and we had to learn, so you've heard it all from everyone already. And I think I would say that I'm just really pleased that our team of 125 in Washington they're safe, they're healthy, they've been working. We didn't have to resort to any layoffs, no furloughs, no pay cuts, no benefit reductions. We're blessed to have a really healthy background in terms of our finances and our balance sheet, and the support of our leaders to say, hey, listen, this is a time when, the 100-year flood hits, you got to pay off on the policy. You can't say, well, we got to manage to the bottom line. So we continue to serve the members and kept everybody together. And we're looking forward to the beginning of this new year because things are off to a great start.
Amazing. Well, walk me through the advocacy pivot maybe you made as an organization, right? Like, what was your agenda February of 2020 versus February 2021, right? I mean, how you were probably on this cadence and advocating for what you normally do. I mean, how dramatically have things shifted in terms of what you're spending your time on as an advocate?
Well, think about it. It's only a little more than a year ago. It was late April 27th of 2020, that the CARES Act got passed, that massive first shot of, well, it wasn't the first, I think by then it might have been the third, because there'd been smaller meaning in the hundreds of billions and in the low trillions instead of in the several trillions by the time we got the CARES Act. So from mid-March, from Friday, March 13th or that weekend, we all began furiously working on trying to help congressional leaders and the administration find ways to support individual families, to support American workers, to support small businesses, to work with the Department of the Treasury, the Federal Reserve, to stand up all those credit facilities, obviously with the SBA and the Paycheck Protection Program. So there was a massive amount of work that got done just in those 6 weeks from mid-March to late April. And then it continued throughout. And then, you know the story. It wasn't until late December that we got sort of another bipartisan deal. And then after the election and the new administration, we've since gotten trillions more. So I would say the agenda changed completely, because you went from peacetime to wartime, essentially, I guess, if we're thinking in military terms. And to the extent that we had spent, like military planners, we'd spent a lot of time in preparedness. We had the balance sheet, we had the financial resources, we had the team in place, we had the members primed and ready to be engaged and supporting as resources. And we were on calls like these with the President of the United States, the Vice President, the Senate Majority Leader, the Senate Minority Leader, the Secretary of the Treasury. We're talking with the Federal Reserve. And so we did everything we could to make sure they understood the perspectives, and they were able to be responsive. And I think the results really bear out that what they did was very, very targeted and yielded great benefits for small businesses, for American workers.
I personally spent a little bit of time working in restaurants, hospitality, and retail. And, one of the things I've always noticed is really just the resiliency of these kind of smaller entrepreneurs, right? They're the ones that pioneer new neighborhoods. It's always a small business, an art studio, a restaurant that kind of pioneers. They're the risk takers, the innovators. What was going through your head in these conversations, right? On one hand, you're talking to the President of the United States, and then you're probably dealing with, smaller entrepreneurs and business owners. How was this impacting them, and what did you see firsthand from a resiliency standpoint of your members, and just, what was happening out there live time?
Well, I would say, Ken, no one gets into the retail industry thinking it's going to be easy. And particularly if you're a small business entrepreneur, as you said, your mindset is already that you're a bit of a risk taker to begin with. And so I think the real challenge for many of the smaller businesses was that they didn't have the same kind of resources. So you didn't possess the same depth in terms of the team or the talent. You didn't have the same relationships with vendors or with landlords necessarily, or the same ability to negotiate. And so, they had to work, and we worked with many of those small businesses to try to elevate their voices. And the other thing, I think we have to recognize, although now it's in the rearview mirror, but at the beginning of this, for those first 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 10 weeks till we got into mid-June, and we saw states start to reopen last summer, there was a real distinction between the haves and the have-nots in terms of who were determined to be essential businesses and who was determined to be non-essential. And we pushed back hard on that language, because we think every business is essential to those communities and to the people they employ and to their customers. So we never bought into that. But there were lots of arbitrary decisions that got made by local officials, by state officials, that just sort of cleaved the industry in half and said, you'll be a winner, you'll be a loser. And that's really what happened. We had local and state government officials, in the name of public health and safety, declaring winners and losers in the marketplace. And we knew a lot less about the coronavirus then than we do now. But we all recognize now there's nothing inherently unsafe about going in to buy shoes or a sweater that makes that any less safe than going in to buy a loaf of bread or pick up a prescription drug. It's if you do social distancing and wear a mask and wash your hands, and it's the same act, it's just a different product. So we pushed back hard on that. That was unfortunate, and that really hurt small businesses disproportionately, because many of them were in that category that was not able to open, and they didn't have the same scale and the reach from a digital perspective. And so that's where I think we saw a lot of innovation take place very, very quickly.
Let's go back real quick to the government's response, right? I think you alluded to it. I mean, this time last year was really kind of a decentralized response, right? States and localities were making these decisions, winners, losers. How do you, kind of reflecting back, think about situations like this when it impacts the whole country? Is this something better handled decentralized, or should Washington maybe have taken a more comprehensive approach and kind of, dictated the states? And, and as you answer that, just take us through how the kind of reopening has impacted members by state, right? Like, you have members who have locations in all these states, and some states are open, some states are not. Like, how is all of that playing in live time over the last, 18 months?
Yeah, well, I think we're not going to unring the bell after 250 years of of the sort of democracy we have here, and the Jeffersonian Hamiltonian battles between, is it centralized at the federal level, is it going to be decentralized at the states? It's in our DNA. It goes back to the Continental Congress and the writing of the Constitution and everything else. So it's a balance. I certainly, both with regard to the closure orders then and the vaccine distribution protocols now, in terms of the categories of eligibility, things like that. It's our view that a centralized approach would have created much more clarity, both for the citizens of the United States as well as for the companies that were trying to follow the rules. And you have one thing in one of the in north and south and east and west, and so if you're operating a business across multiple state lines, it got very complicated, very complex. So I think this is an instance in which we maybe would have put our thumb on the scale a little bit more for a federal approach, but that wasn't the approach that the administration took in 2020. And different states have had different experiences, both with regard to the closure orders, the vaccine distribution, job loss, and I think it'll be a few years till we can write the history on which were the better approaches. So I think that remains to be seen.
So we have a new administration, and the Biden administration is moving pretty quickly on a lot of large packages, from infrastructure to Family Act to stimulus and so on, and vaccine rollout and coordination. What are you focused on today in terms of your advocacy with the administration as we enter the summer? And all the trend lines seem to be heading in the right direction. I mentioned to you before we went live, we had Roger Dow on yesterday or last week from U.S. Travel, and there seems to be some genuine pent-up demand out there for people just to get out, to shop, to spend money. And people seem excited and eager. I mean, what are you hearing from members?
Yeah, well, our forecast for the year is that retail sales will increase between 6.5% and almost 8.5% this year over 2020. And 2020 retail sales grew by more than 6% over 2019. So even in the face of the pandemic, retail sales last year grew by the largest margin in almost 20 years on an annual basis. Now, we all spent money in different ways. We all had to outfit our homes to work from home. Many of us had children going to school from home. We were entertaining, if we were entertaining not at all, or we were dining at home. We were doing recreation and exercise. So we spent money in different categories. Nevertheless, the combination of changed behaviors and all that stimulus money and the inability to put it in some of those other categories like leisure, travel, hospitality, dining, we put it in retail. So last year was a huge year for consumption. This year will be as big or bigger in terms of consumption, because of the pent-up demand and because of the, and I hate to use the word unprecedented because everybody's used it, but I think we've gotten a bit numb to the numbers that are in. But we're talking about trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars that we're throwing at the economy. And at some point, I think, there are going to be people asking the question, given consumer behavior and given the strength of the consumer, how much more do we need to spend before the economy overheats? I think it's one question that'll get asked. In terms of policy priorities, obviously we have to continue the emphasis on vaccine administration and distribution. And we're at a different phase in terms of the conversations that are taking place with those that have not yet been vaccinated. And we have to be thoughtful and respectful about that. And we have to put ourselves in the shoes of those that have questions and understand why they have those questions. And recognize that, as some have said, while we're all in the same storm, we're not all in the same boat. And, we're at different points along that continuum in terms of our comfort levels. I'm vaccinated twice. My wife is vaccinated twice. We're hoping to get our children vaccinated very, very soon. We're very confident that this is the right thing to do. But different people are making different decisions for their own reasons. And we have to be respectful of that, because we've got to try to bring everyone along. So I think that continues to be an area of real primacy and great emphasis. And then on the policy side, there are obviously important things we need to do in terms of the infrastructure investment, and we're certainly part of that conversation. In terms of immigration reform, we came out in support of the solution to essentially the Dreamers and those that came here as children to make sure they've got a pathway to citizenship. And on our trade relationships, we need to work there. So there are a number of areas in which I think there are opportunities to work together with the administration, and we want to continue to do that. And the other big one, I think, is in the area of the workforce and skills and training and development. And our foundation does really extraordinary work there with the certification and training program. And we've got programs that serve underrepresented and underserved communities. And we've got training programs. We've got a scholarship program, a student program. So I think meeting the needs of the new workforce that's going to sort of result from the changes in behavior are all a role we can play. And then, I think it's just an exciting time because we've accelerated so much behavior that's been changing for a few years in terms of the way we do fulfillment and distribution and payments and logistics and social engagement. And, if you look back to 2008, 9, 10, we had 400 retail bankruptcies in each of those years. If you look back over the last year, we've only had about 50. So retailers are healthier in large part because consumers are in a good shape, and also because of the corporate tax rate reductions from 3 years ago allowed them to reinvest in their business. That helped save jobs and save companies. And I think we're looking forward to an exciting, I think, a couple of years. CEOs that I talk to tell me they see this going well into 2022 and beyond.
So talk a little bit more about acceleration, what you've seen. I mean, clearly all of these businesses had to adapt, whether it was e-commerce, distribution, pivoting to mobile. What were the trends that accelerated, in your opinion, the most, for positive or negative, for retail?
Well, I think the digital engagement piece, which became part of all our lives. I mean, this is a form of that, that same kind of thing. And so we had to try to find ways to do many of the things that we did in person previously. We had to do them digitally or remotely. And that's not just, seeing your family and celebrating a birthday this way, or doing a business meeting, but that was, how do you get your groceries? How do you get your prescription drugs? How do you get your fresh produce? How do you get that new pair of shoes that you need? How do you get the technology that you need to work from home or go to school from home? And retailers who were already good at digital and had made investments in fulfillment got even better at it. And those that had not made that investment found ways to do it. And those that were unable to make that investment didn't have the opportunity to serve customers at the same level. And I think that was really the separating line between those that were high performers and those that were low performers. Went to, what's your digital strategy? How are you going to engage with customers? How are you going to take friction out of the system? How are you going to contract your supply chain in a way that allows you to keep getting those goods? And early on, now we forget about it, but there were stock outs on, we go to the grocery store, we went to the retail store, and there were things we couldn't get, empty shelves. That's behind us now, but there's still a little bit of a long tail on some of those things, and things are taking sometimes weeks to order. If you're trying to order furniture or you need a particular item, some of those things have long wait times now because there's so much demand, exercise equipment and other things like that. So it'll take a while to catch up, but there's lots of pent up demand. Consumers have trillions of dollars in savings on the sidelines. They paid down debt last year. They've got all the stimulus money. So I think we're in for a really good next 18, 24 months.
Well, how many of your members, or how are you seeing membership or targeting membership in retailers that have no physical footprint, that are totally e-commerce related? I mean, is that a focus of yours, this kind of Etsy economy? I mean, we keep hearing from industrial companies that are kind of just renting out bays and have totally, non-physical, but just distribution based, digital based, and they're just shipping and packaging product. I mean, is that a bigger trend that's going to accelerate? Are you looking at that? How are you, focused there?
Well, we have as members everyone. So we run the gamut from those that are legacy bricks and mortar that now have pretty robust websites, to those that are legacy digital that now have a few stores. And everything in between. And I would say, if 20 years ago you had, two teams playing in separate end zones, and one end zone was all in person and bricks and mortar, one end zone was all digital. Now the game is being played closer to the 50-yard line. That's where consumers are. Everybody's moved closer to the middle. If you're a digital company, you've got more physical. If you were a bricks and mortar company, you've got a lot more digital. And so we do have companies that are completely remote. But, when people talk about how much got accelerated, we were running at about, of total retail sales before the pandemic, about 15.5% of total retail sales were online. And that spiked in April to almost 19%, and now has settled back down to around 16%. So there was a spike because so many businesses were forced to be closed. But in terms of sort of a ratcheting up of consumer behavior, it went up about 1%. It didn't jump by 5 or 10 or 25% or something like this. So we didn't go to now every 50% of retail is done online. It's still close to 85% in a store and 15% online. Maybe it's 84, 16%. So I think, again, pent-up demand, the desire to be out. We're social creatures. I think as soon as we all feel comfortable getting out there, I know, as you said at the beginning, having a meal, having a coffee, having a glass of wine, taking a trip with your friends, family, visiting a new destination or a familiar one. I mean, there are some things we can only do in person, and I think that's where we all want to go, is back to doing as much together as we can as possible.
So we had a conversation over the summer on economic development. I think it's just going to be so fascinating how localities and states compete for business, right? It used to be the battle for like the big office corporate headquarters, but now it's for everybody, right? The smaller businesses, the entrepreneurs. How are you seeing different states and municipalities kind of ratchet up their efforts and their pitches and their salesmanship to try to convince entrepreneurs and businesses and distribution hubs and national retailers to come to their localities? I mean, how is that street fight playing out nationally?
Well, there's certainly been, over the last couple of years, some fairly visible examples of big companies that have made moves or decided not to go someplace or to move. There's been a lot of noise about tech companies going from California to Texas, for example. A few years ago, there was Amazon, of course, was going to put a big location in New York and decided not to. Now they've got another headquarters going here in Northern Virginia, close to where I sit today. So there's going to continue to be that kind of competition for business. And I think, Ken, it's really about larger businesses, right? Smaller businesses aren't going to. If you're an entrepreneur, you own your own company and you employ 5 people, you got one location. You're probably not going to make a move. So I think we're going to continue to see how that plays out. I think, an interesting sort of adjunct to that competition is going to be competition for workers and the way in which companies try to create incentives for workers as we come out of the pandemic and demonstrate that they are sensitive to and supportive of the needs of their employees, of their team members, of their associates, whether that means more opportunities to work remotely, whether that means more support in the way of benefits or particularly health benefits, flexible work policies, things like that. I think that's going to be a really interesting intersection between that and the work that you do, represent, and your colleagues when you do your day job, is sort of representing tenants and landlords or being part of that conversation, thinking about the workplace of the future. And that's something we've talked to our CEOs about quite a bit as they think through what they're going to do, not just the billions that they already spent in the course of the last year to support their frontline employees in stores and distribution centers and warehouses and how they kept all those employees safe. But now for the headquarters teams, how are they thinking about a return to office and what that looks like, what's the physical space, and what are the benefits and the sort of competition levels to attract people to come back and be part of those teams?
Yeah, I mean, it looked very clearly if one of the takeaways from this was the notion that you can trust your employees now and they can be productive. you need to absorb and process that as you think through kind of planning a return to the office and incentivizing and motivating people. So definitely a lot to talk about. So before I let you go, last kind of topic. I mean, we talked a little bit about some of the legislative priorities, right? It's just fascinating to me. Your scope is just so broad, right? I mean, whether it's privacy issues, trade issues, infrastructure issues, you're tackling all of this. So as you look at that lens of the advocacy, how do you incorporate your advocacy of the largest kind of retailers as well as the smallest? How do you kind of triage what they need versus these macro issues that maybe don't always align per se?
Well, Ken, I would say that when you talk to the CEOs of the very largest member companies that we represent, whether that's a Walmart or a Target or a Lowe's or a Best Buy, any number of Albertsons company or Macy's. I mean, go down the list. One of the things that they say over and over again is that the NRF is the only organization that can really tell the complete story of the industry, because the retail industry is an ecosystem, and you think about those smaller businesses that employ millions of people in the United States, and what those employees do, and those employees are customers at other businesses, or they're suppliers to other businesses, or they've got family members that are working with it. So it's an ecosystem. And in order to tell the story on behalf of the industry, you really need all of those stakeholders to be part of that conversation. And in the 10 plus years I've been at NRF, there has not been an issue on which we've had difference of opinion between and among the members. When it comes to a big policy issue, whether that's tax or trade or healthcare, or you pick an issue, the companies and the small businesses, I think, are aligned on the outcomes. They don't all have the same ability to be part of those conversations always. And for some, it's more important than others. But the examples of conflict about the positions we take are extraordinarily rare, because in many cases you're talking about maybe more zeros and more exposure, but the impact is generally the same. So telling that story is really important, and I think we tell the story best with an open, inclusive, diverse membership, as opposed to an exclusive kind of homogenous membership that wouldn't really have the ability to tell the complete story.
Well, look, Matthew, Shay, thank you so much for being here, and to the work you and your team do every single day, but especially most importantly over the last year as people were trying to deal with this. I mean, incredible, and appreciate you taking the time to be on our show.
Great to be with you, Ken. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Listen, and everybody tuning in, thanks so much. Our next Coffee with Ken is going to be on May 20th. We're going to cover wellness in the workplace. So in the meantime, please practice social distancing, wear a mask, wash your hands, and get a vaccine. Matthew Shay said so. Good to see you, sir. Have a great one.
Thanks, Ken. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye, everyone.